Clara sat by the window in her classroom, her wheelchair pushed neatly against the wall, as if she wanted to take up as little space in the world as possible. Outside, the schoolyard rang with laughter and shouting. Dozens of students sprinted across the concrete, chasing soccer balls and teasing one another, their energy overflowing into every corner of the building. Clara watched quietly, her eyes following the blur of movement. She had grown used to watching life pass her by. At 16, she had mastered the art of silence, of becoming a shadow in the corner that no one cared to notice. To most of her classmates, she was little more than the girl in the wheelchair. It hadn't always been this way. 3 years earlier, Clara had been just like them, running across the fields, skipping rope, climbing trees. She could still remember the wind against her face, the sound of her laughter rising above the chatter of her friends. She had been alive then, in a way she no longer was. But all of that ended one rainy evening when a speeding car tore through a red light. The crash stole her ability to walk, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. She had survived, yes, but survival came with chains. Her legs, once so full of freedom, were now nothing but heavy burdens she carried wherever she went. Clara's father worked long hours at the shipping docks, doing everything he could to cover her medical bills. He rarely smiled anymore. Her mother had died when Clara was just 7, leaving behind faint echoes of lullabies and warm hands she could barely remember. The house was quiet, too quiet, and Clara often filled that silence with books. Books were her escape. Within their pages she could run again, leap, fight dragons, and even fly. She carried them everywhere, fantasy novels, fairy tales, legends of heroes rising from nothing. They were her sanctuary in a world that saw her only as fragile. But school stripped away that sanctuary every day. Teenagers could be merciless. Some ignored her completely, pretending she didn't exist. Others whispered cruel jokes when they thought she couldn't hear. And then there were the bullies, the ones who sought her out like predators circling easy prey. That afternoon, Clara sat in her corner, lost in thought as the teacher's words blurred into background noise. The class ended and chatter replaced the lecture. Laughter filled the air. Clara remained where she was, her fingers brushing the edge of the book on her lap. "Look at her," a girl muttered loudly to her friend, both seated nearby. "She just sits there like a ghost, creepy." Her friend snickered. "She's like a statue, bet she doesn't even feel anything." Clara's jaw tightened. She turned her eyes back to the window, willing herself not to react. If she showed no weakness, maybe they would get bored. She told herself she was used to this. But no one ever really got used to cruelty. The classroom door slammed open. A group of boys strolled in, loud and arrogant. At their head was Damien, the tall, broad-shouldered troublemaker everyone knew to avoid. His smirk alone was enough to silence the chatter around him. He lived to torment, and today his eyes landed on Clara. "Well, if it isn't our broken doll," he sneered, striding toward her corner. His voice carried easily across the room. "Still collecting dust back here." His friends chuckled. Clara's fingers tightened around her book, but she kept her eyes on the window. If she didn't respond, maybe he'd walk away. But Damien thrived on reactions. He bent down, his shadow falling over her. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue, or maybe you're too weak to even speak." Laughter erupted from his friends. Clara's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream to tell him to stop, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat. And then Damien's hand shot out. The slap cracked against her cheek, sharp and stinging. The sound echoed in the room, silencing even the laughter for a moment. Clara's head jerked from the impact. Her cheek burned, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Damien straightened up, smirking. "See, nothing, not even a word, pathetic." His friends roared with laughter, and the tension shattered. Clara stared at the floor, frozen, her body trembling. Her book slipped slightly from her lap, but she didn't move to fix it. The humiliation was worse than the pain. When they finally walked away, the laughter trailing behind them, Clara remained still. Her cheek throbbed, but her heart ached more. Around her, the rest of the students avoided her eyes, shuffling out as the bell rang. No one spoke. No one helped. Clara waited until the room emptied before pushing her chair toward the door. She rolled slowly, each turn of her wheels heavy with shame. But the bullies weren't finished. The hallway was nearly empty when Damien stepped into her path, his grin sharper than before. His friends fanned out beside him, forming a wall she couldn't roll past. "Going somewhere, doll?" Damien asked, mock sweetness in his tone. Clara's hands tightened on her wheels. She didn't answer. Damien leaned casually against her chair, forcing her to stop. "You know what your problem is. You think you're better than us. always hiding behind your books like you're too good to speak to anyone. He reached down and plucked the book from her lap before she could react. Clara gasped softly, reaching out. Please. Oh, she talks, one of the boys mocked. Damien flipped through the book with mock curiosity. Fairy tales again, princesses and knights. Sorry to break it to you, but you'll never be a princess, you can't even stand. His words sliced deeper than the slap had. Clara reached for the book again, desperation flickering in her eyes. Damien pulled it out of reach, grinning. Or you want this back, how about no? He tore a page from the middle with a dramatic rip, and let it flutter to the ground. No, Clara's cry burst from her lips, raw and trembling. Damien tore another page, then another, dropping them one by one as if scattering ashes. His friends laughed, stomping on the fallen pages. Clara's chest heaved. Stop, please. Her voice cracked, but the boys only laughed louder. One shoved her chair back roughly, sending it bumping into the wall. Clara clutched the armrests, her body rattled by the impact. Damien finally dropped the ruined book at her feet, pages spilling across the floor. Pathetic, he spat. That's all you'll ever be. They walked away, their laughter echoing through the corridor. Clara stared at the mess on the floor, tears burning her eyes. Slowly, she bent down, gathering the torn pages with trembling hands. She pressed the broken book to her chest, as if holding it together could somehow fix the pieces inside her that had just shattered. She wheeled herself into the nearest restroom, locking the stall door behind her. There alone, she let the sobs break free. She buried her face in her arms, her body shaking with every breath. Why was the world so cruel? Why had fate chosen her for this life? She hated herself for being weak, for letting them win. She hated that she was always alone. But she wasn't as alone as she thought. Outside the school gates, engines roared to life. Students pressed against windows, whispering in awe and fear. A convoy of motorcycles and black cars had pulled up, their presence heavy and menacing. Men climbed out, men in leather jackets, their arms marked with tattoos, their eyes cold with violence. They didn't belong to the world of textbooks and uniforms. They belonged to the streets, to power, to danger. And they weren't here by accident. Their leader stepped out of a black SUV, tall and broad, his jaw set in stone. His eyes swept the schoolyard with lethal focus before turning toward the building. They were here for someone. And within the hour, Clara, the invisible girl in the corner, would no longer be invisible at all. The roar of engines had drawn nearly every student to the windows. Whispers filled the hallways. Who are they? They look like gangsters. Why are they here? Fear rippled through the crowd as the men entered the school building. They moved in tight formation, their boots striking the floor with a rhythm that carried authority and danger. Every step was deliberate, echoing with menace. At their head was the man from the black SUV. His presence alone made the air heavy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair cropped short, and his eyes cold as winter steel. A jagged scar traced across his cheek, the kind of mark that told stories of violence survived. The students shrank back as the men advanced down the hallway, silent and focused. The man's gaze swept over the frightened faces, but he wasn't looking for just anyone. He was looking for one person. Clara. She was still in the restroom, wiping her swollen eyes with trembling hands. She had calmed herself enough to gather the ruined pieces of her book, tucking them carefully into her bag. Her reflection in the mirror stared back at her, red-eyed, pale but still composed. She hated that she looked so weak. A knock echoed against the restroom door. Clara froze. Clara, the voice was deep, gravelly, and yet strangely familiar. Open the door. Her breath caught. She hadn't heard that voice in years. Not since the funeral. Not since her mother's passing, when he had disappeared from her life without explanation. Her brother. Hands shaking, Clara wheeled to the door and unlocked it. The moment it opened, the man knelt before her, his scarred face softening in a way no one had ever seen. Little sister, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His thumb paused over the faint red mark where Damien had slapped her, his eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. Who did this? Clara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Tears brimmed again, but this time they weren't from pain, they were from shock. She hadn't seen him in nearly 5 years. He had left home, cut ties, vanished into rumors of gangs and violence. Her father never spoke of him, only warning her never to follow his path. And yet here he was. Behind him, the other men waited silently, their posture respectful, their eyes wary. These were not schoolyard bullies. These were hardened thugs, men who followed orders without question, and their leader, her brother, had just returned for her. "Tell me who hurt you," he said again, his voice quieter now but more dangerous. Clara swallowed hard. She wanted to protect him from trouble, to tell him it was nothing. But the memory of the slap, the torn book, the laughter, it all came rushing back. She turned her eyes toward the ground. He followed her gaze, and for him that was enough. The confrontation began only minutes later. The thugs spread out across the hallway like a storm, and the students parted in fear. Damien and his friends, oblivious to the danger until it was too late, swaggered out of a classroom, still laughing about their earlier fun. They froze when they saw the men waiting. The hallway grew silent. Clara's brother stepped forward, his gaze locked on Damien. "Was it you?" he asked, his voice low, almost calm. "Did you lay hands on my sister?" Damien's smirk faltered. What sister? I don't know what you're talking about." The man's fist slammed into a locker beside Damien's head, the metal denting with a sickening crunch. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. Students gasped, some even screamed. Damien stumbled back, pale, his bravado shattered. "Don't lie to me," the man growled. His voice was lethal, his presence suffocating. "You think she's weak because she can't walk. You think that makes her yours to torment." Damien stammered, searching for words. His friends had already shrunk behind him, their bravado dissolving into fear. Clara's brother grabbed Damien by the collar, lifting him onto his toes with terrifying ease. "Look at her," he ordered, jerking his chin toward Clara, who sat at the end of the hall surrounded by thugs guarding her like royalty. "Do you see her? That's my blood, my sister, the only person in this rotten world who matters to me." Damien's eyes darted to Clara. She sat frozen, her hands trembling on the arms of her wheelchair. She hated being the center of this storm, but a part of her, deep buried, long silenced, felt a strange flicker of pride. For once she wasn't invisible. For once someone had come for her. Her brother's voice dropped to a whisper, deadly in its calm. "If you ever touch her again, if you even breathe in her direction, I will make sure you regret the day you were born." He shoved Damien to the ground. The bully scrambled backward, his hands raised in surrender. His friends were already pleading, their voices overlapping in desperate apologies. Clara's brother ignored them. He turned instead to his men. "Clean this mess up," he ordered. The thugs moved with swift precision, corralling the bullies against the lockers, forcing them to their knees. They didn't hurt them, not physically. But the humiliation was worse than any beating. In front of the entire school, the bullies who had once seemed invincible were reduced to trembling cowards. The message was clear: Clara was no longer alone. In the days that followed, everything changed. The bullies avoided Clara entirely, their swagger replaced with silence whenever she passed. Students who had once ignored her now offered hesitant smiles, as though unsure whether to pity or admire her. Teachers pretended not to notice the sudden shift in power dynamics, too afraid to question the men who occasionally lingered near the school gates. But Clara's world had changed in more ways than just her reputation. Her brother's return forced her to face questions she had buried for years. Why had he left? What life had he built with these men who followed him like soldiers? And why? After so long, had he come back now? One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire, Clara sat with him outside her home. He leaned against the hood of his car, arms crossed, his scar catching the last light. "I thought you were gone forever," she admitted softly. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to be, but I couldn't stay away, not after hearing what they were doing to you." Her eyes widened. You knew." "I hear things," he said simply. "Doesn't matter how far I go. You're my sister, Clara. I'll always hear when you cry, even if you don't say a word." Tears pricked her eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. For the first time in years, she felt safe. He crouched down so their eyes were level. "I can't change what happened to you," he said, his voice raw. "I can't give you your legs back, but I swear on my life no one will ever hurt you again, not while I'm breathing." Clara's lips trembled. She reached out, placing her hand on his scarred one. "I don't want them to be afraid of me," she whispered. "I just want them to see me." Her brother's gaze softened. "Then let them see, not just the chair, not just the weakness, but the fire I know you still have inside. You're stronger than they'll ever understand." For a long moment they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken love between them. And in that silence Clara realized something. The bullies had stolen her dignity, her confidence, her sense of belonging. But her brother's return had given her something far greater, the strength to reclaim herself. The next morning, when Clara wheeled into school, she did not